Headlights pierced the darkness of the affluent Chevy Chase cul-de-sac, casting long, menacing shadows against the manicured lawns. Simone Harrow, a senior attorney for the Department of Justice, pulled her Audi into her own garage, exhausted, but safe, or so she thought. Moments later, a police cruiser blocked her driveway, trapping her inside. What Officer Wade Kessler didn't realize as he unholstered his weapon and barked orders at the homeowner was that he wasn't just violating her rights. He was becoming the central figure in a federal civil rights case being documented in real time. Exhaustion rested heavily on Simone Harrow's shoulders, the physical burden of a long day spent navigating the bureaucratic labyrinth of the United States Department of Justice. As the director of the Civil Rights Division's Special Litigation Section, her days were consumed by constitutional crises, systemic police misconduct, and the drafting of federal consent decrees. This assignment had been no different. Her leather briefcase rested on the passenger seat of her charcoal Audi e-tron, filled with thousands of pages of deeply troubling data regarding a corrupt narcotics unit in a major Midwestern city. She had spent a long stretch inside a windowless conference room with Assistant Attorney General Marissa Langford, dissecting Fourth Amendment violations until her eyes burned, leaving the imposing brutalist architecture of the Department of Justice headquarters behind. Simone merged onto Rock Creek Parkway, allowing the smooth, quiet hum of her electric vehicle to soothe her frayed nerves. Washington, District of Columbia, had gone nearly silent. The monuments glowed softly in her rearview mirror as she drove toward the Maryland border. She was in the prime of her career, a Yale law graduate, a former federal prosecutor, and a black woman who had spent her entire adult life fighting for the very scales of justice she wore as a lapel pin. But in the quiet solitude of her car, stripped of her courtroom presence and her federal credentials, she knew the stark reality of the world she lived in. Crossing the district line into the wealthy tree-lined enclave of Chevy Chase, Maryland, the atmosphere shifted. Here, the streetlights were dimmer, designed to preserve the aesthetic of the multi-million-dollar colonial homes that stood far back from the winding roads. Simone lived in this neighborhood with her husband Julian, a high-level cybersecurity architect for the Department of Defense. They had earned their slice of the American dream through relentless hard work. Yet, as she turned onto Connecticut Avenue, a primal instinct honed by decades of lived experience made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She glanced at her rearview mirror. Two distinct, glaring headlights had materialized out of the gloom. They belonged to a Montgomery County Police Department Ford Explorer. Simone's pulse ticked up a fraction of a beat, though her hands remained relaxed at the 10 and 2 positions on the steering wheel. She checked the digital speedometer. She was traveling below the posted limit. Both hands remained on the wheel, and her seatbelt was securely fastened. Her registration was current. Her taillights were fully operational. She had checked them herself. There was absolutely no legal justification for a traffic stop. Still, the cruiser lingered. It didn't pass her when the lane opened up. It matched her speed, hovering perfectly in her blind spot, executing a textbook rolling surveillance technique. Simone's mind, a steel trap of legal precedent, immediately began calculating. Terry versus Ohio, Warren versus the United States. She knew the case law inside and out. She knew that a police officer only needed a pretextual reason, a supposed drift over the yellow line, a license plate light that was allegedly too dim to initiate a stop. She signaled with ample distance and turned onto Bradley Boulevard. The cruiser followed. She signaled again, taking the left onto Sycamore Drive, the quiet, exclusive street where her custom-built home resided. The cruiser followed, closing the gap until it was mere car lengths from her rear bumper. The psychological toll of the moment was suffocating. Simone Harrow was a woman who could subpoena a mayor, who could dismantle an entire police department's funding with a single, meticulously researched memorandum. Yet here in the dark, isolated bubble of her car, she was reduced to the same terrifying vulnerability that she fought to protect others from. A familiar knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach, the burden of knowing that even complete compliance might not protect a black driver from an officer determined to see danger where none existed. Just get home, she told herself, her breathing controlled and even. "You're 2 blocks away. You haven't broken a single law. You're on your own street." She hit the button on her sun visor. Half a block away, the heavy oak panel door of her 3-car garage began to ascend, spilling warm golden light onto her wide, stamped concrete driveway. She signaled her turn, smoothly, angling the Audi onto her property. She rolled forward, the tires crunching softly against the pavement, and parked neatly beside Julian's vacant spot. He was away in London for a cybersecurity summit. Relief washed over her in a tidal wave. She had made it. She shifted the car into park and reached up to press the garage door button a second time, fully intending to close the heavy wooden barrier and lock the world away for the night. But before her finger could depress the plastic button, the world outside exploded in a violent, blinding kaleidoscope of flashing strobes. The piercing red and blue lights bounced off the walls of Simone's garage, turning her meticulously organized sanctuary into a chaotic, strobing nightmare. The Montgomery County cruiser had not just followed her. It had aggressively accelerated, cutting across her driveway at a sharp angle to physically block the exit. The nose of the police vehicle breached the threshold of her property line. The high beams blinded her completely. Simone froze, her hands suspended mid-air. For a brief moment, sheer disbelief paralyzed her. She was parked inside her own home. The engine of her car was off. The heavy thud of a car door slamming shut echoed over the quiet hum of the crickets. Heavy boots crunched on her driveway, moving with aggressive, deliberate speed. "Put your hands where I can see them. Do it now." The voice was a harsh, guttural bark, echoing loudly in the enclosed space of the garage. Simone took a slow, steadying breath. Panic was the enemy of survival. She relied on the cold, calculating detachment that had made her a terror in the courtroom. She rolled down her window just a few inches, enough to communicate, not enough to allow someone to reach in. She kept both hands firmly planted on the top of the steering wheel, fully visible. Officer Wade Kessler stepped into the periphery of her vision. He was a thick-set man with a flushed face and a jaw fixed in a rigid expression of authority. His right hand rested heavily on the grip of his service weapon. His posture was deeply aggressive, a physical manifestation of an adrenaline-fueled display of power. Engine off. Keys on the dash. "Now," Kessler commanded, stepping closer to the driver's side door, his flashlight beam slicing through the narrow opening of the window and blinding Simone. "Officer," Simone said, her voice remarkably steady and free of any tremor. It was the voice she used when cross-examining hostile witnesses. "The vehicle is electric, and it is already powered down. The keys are in my purse on the passenger seat. My hands are on the steering wheel." "I didn't ask for lip." "I asked for compliance," Kessler snapped, shining the light directly into her eyes. "Roll this window all the way down and step out of the vehicle." "I am parked inside my own garage on my private property," Simone stated calmly, squinting against the blinding glare. "Could you please inform me why I am being detained?" "You ran a stop sign at Bradley in Wisconsin." Kessler lied without hesitation. "You also failed to maintain your lane." "Whose house is this? What are you doing in this neighborhood?" The blatant insult hung in the air, toxic and heavy. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" The implication was clear. A black woman in a luxury car pulling into a multi-million-dollar home in that quiet neighborhood didn't fit Officer Kessler's narrow, prejudiced worldview. In his eyes, she was a suspect, an anomaly, an interloper in a wealthy, white enclave. "This is my home," Simone said, her tone icy. "I live here on Sycamore Drive, and I did not run a stop sign at Bradley in Wisconsin, nor did I fail to maintain my lane. Furthermore, a minor traffic infraction does not give you the legal authority to breach the curtilage of my property without a warrant." Kessler's face darkened, the muscles in his neck visibly tightening. The legal terminology curtilage, warrant, detained, seemed to act as an accelerant to his rage. He despised citizens who thought they knew the law. He especially despised it when it came from someone who looked like Simone, speaking to him with the authoritative tone of a superior. "Listen to me, girl," Kessler sneered, stepping aggressively close to the door panel, his hand tightening on his holster. I don't give a damn what you think you know. You are going to step out of this vehicle right now, provide your license and registration, or I am going to rip you out of this car for failure to obey a lawful order and resisting arrest. Do we understand each other? Simone's mind raced. She knew that legally Pennsylvania versus Mims allowed an officer to order a driver out of a vehicle during a lawful traffic stop. But this was not a lawful traffic stop. He had followed her onto her private property without activating his lights prior to her parking. The jurisdiction was murky, the constitutional violations staggering. But she also knew the grim statistics her division compiled every year. She knew that asserting her rights in the dark, isolated from witnesses, could cost her life. Comply physically, resist legally. It was the mantra she taught young civil rights activists. Now she had to live it. I will step out of the vehicle, Simone said, moving with exaggerated slowness. I am not resisting. I am unlocking the door now. She popped the door handle. As the heavy door swung open, Kessler didn't give her the chance to step out under her own power. He lunged forward, grabbing her upper left arm with a brutal, crushing grip. Hey! Simone gasped, the sudden physical violence shocking her despite her mental preparation. Shut up and turn around, Kessler bellowed. He yanked her out of the driver's seat with enough force that she stumbled, her shoulder slamming hard against the exterior of her own car. Before she could regain her balance, Kessler shoved her face first toward the sleek sloping hood of the Audi. Spread your legs, he ordered, kicking her left ankle hard with his heavy boot, forcing her stance wide. Officer, you are using excessive force, Simone said, her cheek pressed against the cool metal of her car. Her voice was strained, but she refused to let him hear her panic. I am fully compliant. You are committing battery. I told you to shut your mouth. Kessler leaned his heavy body weight against her back, pinning her in place. He reached to his utility belt, the metallic clatter of steel handcuffs echoing loudly in the garage. You're under arrest for failure to comply, eluding a police officer and suspicion of driving under the influence. Eluding, Simone said, almost scoffing despite the pain shooting through her shoulder. You never activated your lights until I was parked inside my home. There is no suspicion of driving under the influence. You are fabricating charges to justify an illegal detention. Hands behind your back, he ordered. Then he wrenched her left arm backward, twisting her wrist at an unnatural, agonizing angle. The cold steel of the handcuff clamped down on her wrist, ratcheting tight enough to immediately cut off circulation. He grabbed her right arm, forcing it to meet the left, and secured the second cuff. She was a high-ranking official of the United States Department of Justice. She had the private cell phone number of the Attorney General in her contacts, and she was currently handcuffed to the hood of her car in her own garage, completely at the mercy of a man who viewed her very existence as a crime. The searing pain in Simone's wrists was sharp, but the white-hot clarity in her mind was sharper. She stood awkwardly beside the hood of her Audi, her arms secured tightly behind her back, her posture rigidly upright despite Kessler's attempts to keep her off balance. Tires screeched on the asphalt outside. A second Montgomery County police cruiser careened to a halt on the street, its light bar adding a new layer of blinding, chaotic strobes to the scene. The cavalry had arrived. Officer Adrian Holt stepped out of the second unit, jogging up the driveway. He was younger than Kessler, with a thin, nervous face, and a uniform that looked slightly too large for him. He slowed his pace as he crossed the threshold of the garage, his eyes darting from the luxury vehicles to the high ceilings, and finally to the well-dressed black woman handcuffed by his partner. "Everything good here, Wade?" Holt asked, his voice lacking the aggressive conviction of his partner. He looked profoundly uncomfortable. "Got a runner here." Kessler panted slightly, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. He sounded triumphant. Blew a stop sign, refused to pull over, tried to duck into this garage to hide, refused lawful orders, combative, smelled alcohol. Every word was a deliberate falsehood. Simone locked eyes with Officer Holt. "Officer," Simone said, projecting her voice so it was clear, distinct, and commanding. "My name is Simone Harrow. I am the homeowner of this property. I did not run a stop sign. Your partner did not initiate his lights or sirens until I was fully parked inside this garage. I have consumed 0 alcohol. I have been entirely compliant. He dragged me from my vehicle and assaulted me. Holt shifted his weight from foot to foot, looking between Simone and Kessler. The familiar blue wall of silence was erecting itself right in front of her eyes. Holt saw a distressed, handcuffed woman in an affluent setting, making entirely rational, legally sound claims. But he was looking at Kessler, his senior officer, waiting for the cue that would tell him which version of reality to accept. Don't listen to a word she says. She's a liar, and she's highly uncooperative. Kessler sneered. He turned to Simone, a nasty smile playing on his lips. Let's see what you're trying to hide in here. Without asking for consent, without stating probable cause, Kessler leaned into the driver's side of the Audi. Officer Kessler, I do not consent to a search of my vehicle, Simone stated, her voice ringing out like a gavel strike. You have no warrant. You have no probable cause. That vehicle contains sensitive classified federal documents. Kessler laughed, a cruel, mocking sound that echoed in the garage. Classified federal documents, right? Sure. Are you a secret agent now? Let me guess. You're best friends with the president. I am the director of the Special Litigation Section for the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice, Simone said, her tone carrying cold certainty. And you are currently committing a felony violation of Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. Kessler paused for a brief moment, his hand hovering over her leather briefcase. For a moment, a flicker of doubt crossed his face, but his ego, swollen by years of unchecked authority, quickly squashed it. He grabbed her purse and dumped its contents onto the passenger seat. Lipstick, a wallet, a set of keys, and her Department of Justice identification badge spilled out. He didn't even bother to look at the badge. Next, he grabbed her leather briefcase. Holt, keep an eye on her, Kessler barked, tearing the brass clasps of the briefcase open. Wade, maybe we should run her identification first, Holt began, his anxiety showing as he looked around the expensive garage. I said keep an eye on her, Kessler snapped. He began violently rummaging through the meticulously organized folders inside the briefcase. These were the highly confidential drafts of the Baltimore Police Department consent decree. Kessler was ripping through pages of sworn testimonies, confidential informant data, and federal tactical strategies. You're a real piece of work, lady, Kessler muttered, pulling out a stack of papers and tossing them carelessly onto the dashboard. You think you can come into a neighborhood like this, act as though you own the place, and talk down to a sworn officer of the law. People like you think the rules don't apply. People like you. Simone stood in the harsh glare of the police lights, the cold metal of the handcuffs cutting into her skin. But as she watched Officer Kessler illegally rifle through federal property, desecrating her work and her civil rights, a profound, chilling sense of calm washed over her. Kessler thought he was a god in this garage. He thought the darkness covered his sins. He thought it was his word, the word of a decorated white police officer against the word of a black woman. He thought he controlled the narrative. He was completely wrong. Simone didn't look at Kessler. She didn't look at the nervous Officer Holt. Slowly, deliberately, she tilted her chin upward, her eyes fixing on the far upper right corner of the garage ceiling. Nestled inconspicuously between the heavy wooden rafters, perfectly concealed in shadow, was a small, sleek black dome. It was a commercial-grade, ultra-high definition, pan-tilt zoom security camera. It wasn't just a camera. It was part of an advanced, hardwired security grid that her husband Julian had custom installed. Because of the highly sensitive nature of both of their government clearances, Julian had bypassed standard wireless systems, which could easily be jammed by sophisticated burglars. The camera in the garage, along with 6 others around the property, was hardwired directly via Category 6 Ethernet cable to a secure server rack in their basement. More importantly, it featured a highly sensitive noise-canceling directional microphone. It didn't just record video, it recorded crystal clear audio, and it wasn't recording to a local memory card that a corrupt cop could smash under his boot. It was live syncing via an encrypted multi-layered virtual private network directly to a secure cloud server. The camera had captured every lie Kessler told about the stop sign, every aggressive command, every racial insult, Simone's clear demand to know why she was being detained, the sound of her body striking the car, her unequivocal refusal to consent to a search, Kessler's mockery of her credentials, and Holt's fearful silence. It was capturing it right now. High-definition video, pristine audio, time-stamped and legally unassailable. Simone stared directly into the tiny, unblinking glass lens of the camera. The pain in her shoulders evaporated, replaced by the lethal, calculating adrenaline of a trial lawyer who has just been handed the smoking gun by the defense's own star witness. "Keep going, Officer Kessler," Simone thought. A cold, deliberate focus settled into her deep brown eyes as she watched him toss another confidential federal document onto the floor of her car. "Keep building the case against yourself." Papers fluttered to the concrete floor of the garage. Pristine legal documents trampled beneath Officer Wade Kessler's heavy boots. He continued his frantic, fruitless search of Simone's vehicle, his frustration mounting with each passing moment. He had expected to find something, anything to justify his adrenaline-fueled rage, a weapon, illicit drugs, an open container of alcohol. Instead, he was staring at complex federal consent decrees and endless pages of bureaucratic litigation that he could barely comprehend. Kessler's thick fingers finally snatched up the leather wallet he had dumped onto the passenger seat. He flipped it open. The heavy gold shield of the Department of Justice caught the harsh glare of his flashlight, reflecting a cold golden beam directly into his eyes. Beside the badge was Simone's official government identification card, complete with her photograph, her security clearance level, and her title. The card identified her as the director of the Special Litigation Section within the Civil Rights Division. Officer Adrian Holt stepped closer, craning his neck to look over his partner's shoulder. The younger cop's face instantly drained of color. "Wade," Holt whispered, his voice cracking with sudden, overwhelming dread. "Wade, look at the identification. That's a federal badge. She works for the Department of Justice." Kessler stared at the laminated card for a long, heavy moment. A rational man, a trained professional, would have realized the catastrophic error of his ways. A rational man would have immediately uncuffed the homeowner, apologized profusely, and prayed that his union representative was awake. But Kessler was not a rational man. He was a bully caught in a trap of his own making, fueled by a deeply ingrained prejudice that simply could not accept the reality in front of him. His ego demanded that he maintain dominance. "You can buy these on the internet for a small amount of money." Kessler sneered, aggressively shoving the identification back into the wallet and tossing it onto the hood of the Audi. He turned back to Simone, his face inches from hers. "You think you're smart? You think a fake badge is going to scare me off? Impersonating a federal officer is a felony, sweetheart. You have added another serious federal charge to your situation." Simone did not flinch. She kept her breathing steady, her eyes locked onto Kessler's flushed, sweating face. "I strongly suggest you run the credential number through your dispatch system before you make another move," Simone said evenly, her voice devoid of panic. "Because when the Federal Bureau of Investigation pulls the logs of this encounter, your willful refusal to verify a federal official's identity will establish malicious intent." "Shut up!" Kessler roared, spit flying from his lips. He grabbed her by the bicep, his grip brutal and punishing. "You are under arrest. You have the right to remain silent, and I highly suggest you start using it." He yanked her away from the Audi, half dragging her toward the open garage door. The metal cuffs bit violently into Simone's wrists, scraping her skin raw, but she forced herself to walk with perfect, fluid balance. She deliberately placed one foot carefully in front of the other, her posture impeccably straight. She was silently establishing on her own high-definition surveillance camera that she was entirely sober, physically compliant, and in complete control of her motor functions. She was building her case step by agonizing step, As they emerged from the garage and stepped onto the paved driveway, the commotion finally disturbed the wealthy, insulated silence of Sycamore Drive. The front door of the house directly across the street swung open. An older, distinguished man wearing a heavy wool robe stepped out onto his porch. It was Roland Whitaker, a retired federal appellate judge who had lived in the neighborhood for most of his retirement. "What in the world is going on out here?" Judge Whitaker called out, his authoritative voice carrying easily over the static of the police radios. He began walking down his driveway toward the flashing cruisers. "Get back inside your house, sir. This is an active police scene," Kessler barked, putting a hand on his holstered weapon. Whitaker ignored the command, marching right up to the edge of Simone's property line. He squinted through the harsh strobe lights, his eyes settling on the handcuffed woman being manhandled by the furious officer. "Simone?" Whitaker asked, genuine shock spreading across his face. "Simone, is that you?" "Roland," Simone replied calmly, though her breathing was strained. "I am being unlawfully detained. Officer Kessler here claims I ran a stop sign and am resisting arrest. Sir, I am giving you one final warning to step back, or you will be arrested for interfering with a police investigation," Kessler shouted, pointing a thick finger at the older man. Judge Whitaker drew himself up to his full height. He looked at Kessler, then at the trembling Holt, and finally at Simone's secured wrists. Decades of judicial experience allowed him to read the scene perfectly. He saw an officer far beyond the limits of his lawful authority, and a brilliant attorney remaining calm while the officer created the evidence that would expose him. "Officer," Whitaker said, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet, patronizing register. "My name is Roland Whitaker. I served on the United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit throughout a long judicial career. The woman you are currently brutalizing is one of the most senior civil rights attorneys in the federal government. I strongly advise you to remove those handcuffs." Holt took a panicked step backward, looking as though he might physically be sick. "Wade, we need to stop. We need to call the sergeant." "I don't care if she's the Queen of England," Kessler yelled, completely unhinged by the public challenge to his authority. He shoved Simone roughly toward the back of his cruiser. "She broke the law. She eluded a traffic stop and she is going to jail. Stay back, sir." Kessler practically threw Simone into the plastic-lined back seat of the Ford Explorer, slamming the heavy door shut behind her with a deafening crash. He stomped around to the driver's side, ignoring Holt's desperate, pleading whispers. The cruiser's engine roared to life. Kessler reversed hard, leaving dark tire marks across Simone's clean driveway before speeding away. In the cramped back seat, Simone leaned her head against the hard plastic partition, while pain pulsed through her wrists. Through the metal mesh, she could see Kessler gripping the steering wheel, his knuckles white, his chest heaving with misplaced adrenaline. She wasn't scared anymore. The fear had entirely evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating fury. Kessler had crossed the Rubicon. He had breached her home, assaulted her, ignored a federal mandate, and publicly humiliated her. He thought he was taking her to a cage. He didn't realize that every mile was carrying him closer to federal prosecution. The Montgomery County Police 2nd District Station was a cinder-block fortress bathed in the unforgiving glare of fluorescent tubes. It smelled of stale coffee, industrial floor wax, and the sour sweat of desperation. Inside the precinct, the bullpen was a sluggish landscape of exhausted officers typing reports and booking petty offenders. That sluggishness vanished the moment Officer Wade Kessler marched Simone Harrow through the heavy double doors of the holding area. Kessler kept a firm, punishing grip on Simone's bicep, parading her past the holding cells like a trophy hunter, displaying a prized kill. Simone walked with her head held high, her expression an impenetrable mask of absolute composure. She ignored the stares of the uniformed officers and the muttered comments from the holding tank. She was mentally cataloging everything: the layout of the room, the badge numbers of the officers present, the position of every officer, and every visible detail around the booking desk. "Got a live one for you, Everett?" Kessler announced loudly as he approached the raised booking desk. He practically shoved Simone toward the counter. Desk Sergeant Everett Sloan, A longtime veteran with a graying mustache and deeply lined eyes looked up from his monitor. He took one look at Simone, her tailored designer blazer, her expensive blouse, her complete lack of intoxication or erratic behavior, and frowned. "What's the charge, Wade?" Sloan asked, his tone flat, exhausted by Kessler's constant need for theatrics. Eluding a police officer, resisting arrest, failure to obey a lawful order, and suspicion of driving under the influence. Kessler rattled off proudly, tossing Simone's purse and the leather wallet onto the high counter. She refused a breath test at the scene, Kessler claimed. He claimed she was some powerful federal lawyer, had a fake Department of Justice badge in her wallet. Sloan's heavy brow furrowed. He reached out and picked up the leather wallet, opening it to reveal the gold shield and the identification card. Sloan had processed thousands of arrests in his career. He had seen every fake identification a college student could print. He ran his thumb over the raised holographic seal of the Department of Justice on the plastic card. He felt the weight of the brass badge. It wasn't fake. It was unquestionably real. Sergeant Sloan's stomach plummeted into his boots. He looked up from the identification, his eyes locking onto Simone's. "Ma'am," Sloan said, his voice suddenly very quiet, very respectful. "Is this your identification?" "It is, Sergeant," Simone replied, her voice steady and echoing clearly in the sudden silence of the booking area. "I am Simone Harrow, Director of the Special Litigation Section, Civil Rights Division, United States Department of Justice. I was assaulted and unlawfully arrested inside my own garage by Officer Kessler." Kessler let out a loud, mocking snort. "Don't listen to her, Everett. She's full of it. I want her processed, fingerprinted, and thrown in holding. I'm going to go write up the arrest report." "Wade, shut up," Sloan snapped, his voice cracking like a whip. The sudden venom in the older sergeant's tone made Kessler freeze. Sloan didn't take his eyes off Simone. "Ma'am, are you injured?" "My wrists are losing circulation, Sergeant, and my left shoulder was injured." "When your officer slammed me against the hood of my vehicle," Simone stated factually. "Get those cuffs off her right now," Sloan ordered, pointing a trembling finger at Kessler. "Everett, you can't be serious." "She is lying," Kessler protested. "I said take the cuffs off her, Wade." "Now," Sloan roared, standing up from his desk. The entire bullpen fell dead silent. Officers stopped typing. Telephones rang unanswered. Every eye in the room was locked onto the booking desk. Holt, who had been hovering nervously near the doorway, practically sprinted forward, fumbling for his cuff keys. His hands were shaking so badly, he dropped the keys twice before finally managing to unlock the metal bracelets. Simone brought her arms forward, wincing slightly as blood rushed back into her deeply bruised, deeply grooved wrists. She rubbed them slowly, not breaking eye contact with Sergeant Sloan. "Ma'am, you have the right to a phone call," Sloan said, his face pale. "You can use the phone on my desk." "Thank you, Sergeant," Simone said. She reached across the counter and picked up the receiver. She didn't dial a local defense attorney. She didn't dial a bail bondsman. She dialed a number she knew by heart, a direct encrypted line to the Deputy Assistant Attorney General in Washington, District of Columbia. The line connected quickly. "Vale," a tired, deep voice answered. "Preston, it's Simone." The grogginess instantly vanished from the line. "Simone, why are you calling from a police station? Are you safe?" "I am currently standing at the booking desk of the Montgomery County Police 2nd District Precinct," Simone said, her voice carrying easily across the dead, quiet room. Every police officer in the vicinity was hanging on her every word. "I have been unlawfully detained, physically assaulted, and falsely charged by an officer, Wade Kessler. My vehicle containing the confidential Baltimore consent decree files was illegally searched without a warrant." A heavy, terrifying silence hummed on the other end of the line. When Preston Vale spoke again, his voice was pure ice. "Are you secured?" "I am currently uncuffed, standing at the booking desk," Simone replied. "Do not say another word to anyone," Vale commanded. I am waking up the special agent in charge at the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Washington Field Office immediately. I am dispatching a federal transport unit to your location. Give the phone to the highest-ranking officer in that building." "Hold, please," Simone said politely. She held the receiver out towards Sergeant Sloan. "My Deputy Assistant Attorney General would like to speak with your watch commander." Sergeant Sloan looked at the phone as if it were a live hand grenade. He slowly picked it up and brought it to his ear. "This is Desk Sergeant Sloan." He listened in tense silence. All the color drained from his face, leaving him a sickly, ashen gray. "Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I understand completely. The watch commander is on his way." Sloan hung up the phone and looked at Kessler, who was standing a few feet away, finally beginning to look uncertain. The smug, arrogant grin had melted off Kessler's face, replaced by the dawning horror of a man realizing he had just stepped off a cliff in the dark. "Wade," Sergeant Sloan said, his voice shaking. "Give me your gun and your badge." "What?" "Everett, you can't do this." "She ran a stop sign," Kessler protested, his voice pitching up in panic. "Give me your weapon, Wade," Sloan repeated, stepping out from behind the desk. "Captain Bellamy is coming down here right now. The Federal Bureau of Investigation is already on the way. You are being stripped of your police powers, effective immediately." Kessler looked wildly around the room, looking for support from his fellow officers, but the blue wall of silence had crumbled. No one met his gaze. They were all looking down at their shoes, distancing themselves from the consequences gathering around Wade Kessler. Simone stood quietly by the desk, rubbing her bruised wrists. She watched Kessler unbuckle his gun belt with trembling hands, the heavy metal clattering onto the counter. He had taken her power in the darkness of her garage, relying on lies and brute force. Now, in the harsh light of the precinct, the full weight of the federal government was bearing down on him, and he was shrinking before her very eyes. Captain Conrad Bellamy had built his career by carefully navigating the politics of local law enforcement, aiming for a quiet, pension-padded retirement. That dream evaporated the moment he hurried out of the precinct elevator, hastily buttoning a wrinkled uniform shirt over his undershirt. The bullpen, usually a chorus of ringing phones and clacking keyboards during the overnight shift, was as silent as an empty courtroom. Every officer stood rigidly at their desks, eyes darting between the captain and the impeccably dressed black woman, sitting with perfect posture on a hard wooden bench near the booking desk. Bellamy bypassed his officers and walked straight to Sergeant Sloan, his face slick with a nervous sweat. Sloan leaned in, whispering the catastrophic details of the arrest. With every word, Bellamy's complexion paled. By the time Sloan finished, the captain looked as though he might physically collapse. Bellamy approached Simone, forcing a strained diplomatic smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Director Harrow, I am Captain Bellamy, the watch commander. I want to personally apologize for any miscommunication or distress that occurred. If you'll just step into my office, we can get this all straightened out, have some coffee, and get you on your way home." "Captain Bellamy," Simone replied, her voice echoing off the cinder-block walls, devoid of any warmth. "I am not here to have coffee. I am not here to straighten things out. I am currently the victim of a false arrest, an aggravated battery, and a warrantless search of highly confidential federal property. I am waiting for my colleagues from the Bureau. Until they arrive, I have nothing further to say to anyone in this department." Bellamy swallowed hard, the Adam's apple bobbing in his thick throat. "Ma'am, please. Officer Kessler has been disarmed. We are initiating an internal affairs investigation immediately. Let's not escalate this beyond what is necessary." "The escalation," Simone stated coldly, "occurred the moment your officer decided my driveway was his personal jurisdiction, and my civil rights were optional." Before Bellamy could attempt another desperate plea for damage control, the heavy glass double doors of the precinct lobby were violently thrown open. The local officers flinched as half a dozen figures strode into the room, moving with the terrifying synchronized purpose of a federal tactical unit. They weren't wearing local blues. They wore tailored dark suits and navy windbreakers emblazoned with the bright yellow letters of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. At their center was Special Agent in Charge, Gideon Cross, a tall, broad-shouldered man with iron-gray hair and eyes that possessed all the warmth of a frozen lake. Cross bypassed the front desk entirely, marching past a stunned local deputy. He locked eyes with Simone, giving her a sharp, respectful nod before turning his devastating gaze onto Captain Bellamy. "Captain Conrad Bellamy?" Cross asked, flashing a gold badge that commanded immediate, absolute submission. "I am Special Agent in Charge, Gideon Cross of the Washington Field Office. The Department of Justice is assuming total jurisdictional control of this precinct, and this investigation effective immediately. Agent Cross, we have the situation under control." Bellamy stammered, stepping forward. "The offending officer has been stripped of his authority," Bellamy began. "You have nothing under control," Cross interrupted, his voice slicing through the room like a scalpel. He pointed to Simone's leather briefcase and purse still sitting on the booking counter. "Is that the federal property that was illegally searched?" "Yes, Agent Cross," Simone confirmed, standing up. "Secure the perimeter. Nobody enters. Nobody leaves without my authorization." Cross barked to his agents. Two heavily armed federal agents immediately posted themselves at the exit doors. Two more moved behind the booking desk, physically displacing Sergeant Sloan and taking control of the computer terminals. "Captain," Cross continued, stepping directly into Bellamy's personal space, "where is the officer who put his hands on the director of the Special Litigation Section?" Bellamy pointed a shaky finger toward the hallway leading to the interrogation rooms. "Interview room 3. He's in with his union rep." "Not anymore, he isn't," Cross said. He turned to Simone, his tone softening only a fraction. "Director Harrow, if you would accompany me to the captain's office. We need to establish the exact timeline of civil rights violations before I take this local cowboy into federal custody." Simone nodded, following Cross into the glass-walled office, leaving a completely paralyzed local police force in her wake. Down the hall, inside interrogation interview room 3, Wade Kessler was pacing like a caged animal. His union representative, a tired man named Elias Crow, sat at the metal table, rubbing his temples. "You are panicking over nothing, Elias," Kessler said, running a hand through his sweat-soaked hair. "So she works for the federal government. Big deal. She still ran a stop sign. She still evaded a traffic stop. She still resisted arrest. My body camera malfunctioned. So it's my word against hers, and I'm a decorated officer. The brass will protect me. They always do. We just say she was erratic and aggressive, and I use standard mechanical compliance. Wade, you dragged a Department of Justice director out of her car in her own garage." Elias Crow sighed, looking up. "The Federal Bureau of Investigation is in the lobby. You don't understand the gravity." The door to the interrogation room didn't open. It was shoved inward with enough force to dent the drywall. Special Agent Cross stepped into the small room, casting a massive, imposing shadow over the metal table. "Union representation is dismissed," Cross ordered, staring directly at Elias Crow. "I have a right to be here to represent my client," Crow began. "This is no longer an internal departmental inquiry," Cross said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble. "This is a federal criminal investigation into a felony violation of Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 242. If you do not vacate this room, I will have you arrested for obstructing a federal agent. Out." Crow did not hesitate. He packed his notepad and scurried out the door, abandoning Kessler without a second glance. Kessler stood alone, suddenly feeling very small in the windowless room. He puffed out his chest, trying to summon the bullish authority he had wielded so freely only a short while earlier. "You feds think you can just march in here?" Kessler sneered, though his voice lacked its usual venom. "I was doing my job. She ran a stop sign at Bradley in Wisconsin. She refused to pull over. When I approached her in the garage, she was combative. I felt my safety was threatened. There is no body camera footage, so you can't prove a damn thing. It's my word against hers, and a local judge will back the badge every time." Cross didn't yell. He didn't slam his hands on the table. He simply pulled a sleek silver smartphone from his inside jacket pocket, unlocked it, and slid it across the metal table toward Kessler. "You're right about one thing, Wade," Cross said quietly. "Your body camera mysteriously malfunctioned right before you breached her property line. A remarkable coincidence. But you made a critical career-ending error. You assumed the darkness was your friend." Kessler looked down at the phone. The screen was paused on a high-definition video frame. It was a wide angle, crystal clear, full-color shot of Simone's garage, illuminated by the blinding strobe lights of Kessler's cruiser. The angle was from above, capturing the entire driveway, the vehicles, and every single movement. "Press play," Cross commanded softly. With a trembling finger, Kessler tapped the screen. The audio kicked in instantly. Pristine directional audio eliminated nearly all background noise from the street. Kessler heard his own voice, echoing with terrifying clarity. "I didn't ask for lip. I asked for compliance." He watched in ultra-high definition as Simone explicitly explained she was on private property. He watched as he yanked the door open. He watched himself grab her arm, rip her from the driver's seat, and violently slam her against the hood of the Audi. He watched as he mocked her federal badge. He watched himself illegally rip open the leather briefcase, tossing confidential federal documents onto the floor like garbage. Every lie he had just told his union rep, every lie he had told the booking sergeant, was systematically dismantled by the unblinking objective truth of the secure, hardwired pan-tilt zoom security camera. Kessler's breath caught in his throat. His chest tightened as if bound by iron bands. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a corpse. He stared at the looping video, the realization of his absolute inescapable doom, washing over him like a tidal wave. Director Harrow's husband is a senior cybersecurity architect for the Department of Defense, Cross explained casually, leaning against the doorframe. That camera doesn't record to a local drive you can conveniently lose. It streams directly to an encrypted secure cloud server. The file was securely dated, geolocated, and preserved as the first major exhibit in the federal case against you. Kessler tried to speak, but only a pathetic, choked gasp escaped his lips. His career wasn't just over. His life as a free man had just evaporated. "Officer Wade Kessler," Cross said, pulling a pair of heavy federal-issue handcuffs from his belt. "You are under arrest for the deprivation of rights under color of law, aggravated battery, and evidence tampering. Put your hands behind your back." The consequences spread rapidly. The arrest of Officer Wade Kessler did not remain a quiet, internal matter swept under the rug by police unions and sympathetic local judges. Simone Harrow made absolutely sure of that. As a woman who had dedicated her life to dismantling systemic corruption, she refused to allow her own traumatizing experience to become just another statistical anomaly. The Department of Justice officially launched a comprehensive pattern or practice investigation into the Montgomery County Police Department. The video from Simone's garage was not leaked to the press. It was played in open federal court during Kessler's arraignment, entirely bypassing local grand jury politics. The pristine audio of Kessler fabricating a traffic stop, combined with his violent physical assault on a fully compliant citizen, left his high-priced union defense attorneys with absolutely no room to maneuver. Officer Adrian Holt, terrified of federal prison, flipped immediately. Soon afterward, he was sitting in a windowless room at the Federal Bureau of Investigation field office, trading his badge and his career for immunity. He provided sworn testimony detailing a long history of Kessler's racially motivated traffic stops, the systematic disabling of body cameras, and the precinct's culture of covering up excessive force. Holt's confession acted as the key that unlocked a Pandora's box of departmental rot. Captain Conrad Bellamy was forced into a disgraced retirement after being cited for severe administrative negligence and failure to supervise. The blue wall of silence, which had protected the precinct for decades, crumbled entirely under the crushing weight of federal subpoenas and Federal Bureau of Investigation forensic audits. For Wade Kessler, there was no leniency, no quiet resignation, and no relocation to another department in a different state. The federal judge, a strict constitutionalist appointed decades prior, viewed Kessler's actions as an egregious betrayal of the public trust. Faced with insurmountable digital evidence and the testimony of his own partner, Kessler pleaded guilty to the federal civil rights charges. He was stripped of his pension, permanently banned from holding any position in law enforcement, and sentenced to 4 years in a federal penitentiary. Long after the incident, cool air had finally replaced the brutal humidity across the Washington District of Columbia region. Simone Harrow pulled her Audi e-tron off the busy expanse of Connecticut Avenue. The familiar quiet of Chevy Chase welcomed her home. The bruising on her wrists had long since faded. The physical soreness in her shoulder was completely gone. But the psychological scars, the sudden spike in her heart rate whenever a police cruiser pulled in behind her in traffic, the hypervigilance that now accompanied her commutes home remained. It was a burden she now shared intimately with the thousands of victims her division represented every year. The abstract concept of systemic injustice had manifested in her own driveway, proving that no amount of education, wealth, or federal authority could provide absolute immunity from the color of her skin. She turned onto Sycamore Drive. The street was quiet, the massive colonial homes glowing warmly against the twilight. She hit the button on her sun visor. The heavy oak panel door of her garage began to ascend, spilling light onto the concrete. She pulled in, parking perfectly beside Julian's car. She put the vehicle in park, turned off the ignition, and sat in the quiet silence of the garage. Simone looked up at the far right corner of the ceiling. The small, sleek black dome of the secure camera rested silently in the shadows, its tiny red indicator light blinking steadily. The camera had preserved the truth when her own voice was being dismissed. Simone took a deep, centering breath and allowed the tension in her shoulders to ease. She grabbed her purse and her heavy leather briefcase, filled once again with fresh federal consent decrees aimed at reforming another troubled department in another city. She stepped out of the car, hitting the button on the wall to close the garage door. As the heavy wooden barrier descended, sealing her sanctuary from the darkness outside, Simone Harrow stood tall. The system had tried to break her in the dark, but she was the architect of the light, and there was still important work waiting for her. What happened to Simone carried a lesson far beyond one unlawful arrest. Education, professional success, wealth, and authority may open many doors, but they cannot always protect a person from prejudice in the mind of someone who has been trusted with power. That truth can feel painful, yet the story also shows why courage, preparation, and integrity matter so deeply. Simone survived the encounter because she understood the difference between surrendering her dignity and choosing the safest response. She followed physical commands without abandoning her legal rights. She spoke clearly, remained observant, and refused to let anger make decisions for her. Her calm did not excuse Kessler's behavior. It preserved the truth long enough for accountability to reach him. There is also an important lesson in Adrian Holt's silence. He recognized that something was wrong, but fear kept him from acting when his intervention mattered most. Later cooperation helped expose a larger pattern, but it could not erase the moment when he chose loyalty to a colleague over responsibility to another human being. Good intentions have little value when they remain hidden behind silence. Character is revealed through the choices we make when speaking up carries a personal cost. Accountability is not the same as revenge. Simone did not use her position to create false charges or demand punishment beyond the law. She allowed evidence, testimony, and due process to establish what happened. That distinction matters. Justice is strongest when it remains fair, even toward those who acted unfairly. Consequences protect future victims, but fairness prevents justice from becoming another form of abuse. The story also reminds us that forgiveness does not require forgetting, minimizing harm, or removing responsibility. A person may choose to release hatred while still supporting honest consequences. Healing can begin when the truth is acknowledged, the harm is taken seriously, and those responsible accept what their choices caused. Forgiveness is personal. Accountability belongs to the community as well. Most people will never face a moment as dramatic as Simone's, but everyone will eventually hold some form of power over another person. It may happen at work, inside a family, in a classroom, or during an ordinary conversation. In those moments, kindness is not weakness, listening is not surrender, Treating someone with dignity is one of the clearest signs of real strength. The camera preserved what happened in Simone's garage, but technology alone was not the hero of the story. The deeper protection came from truth, preparation, and people who were finally willing to act on the evidence. Systems improve when honest individuals refuse to normalize misconduct. Leaders take responsibility, and witnesses decide that silence is no longer acceptable. Simone returned to her work because one painful experience did not define the limits of her purpose. She carried the memory with her, but she also carried a deeper understanding of the people whose cases had once existed only in reports and legal files. Her experience did not make her smaller. It made her commitment more personal. Living with integrity rarely guarantees an easy path. It does, however, give us something cruelty cannot take away: the knowledge that our choices reflected the person we wanted to be. We cannot control every injustice, but we can decide whether we contribute to it, ignore it, or help bring it into the light. If Simone's story stayed with you, share it with someone who believes that dignity and accountability should belong to everyone. Support the channel for more emotional stories about courage, responsibility, and the quiet strength required to stand for what is right. And leave a thoughtful comment. What would you have done in Simone's position? And what choice do you hope you would make if you witnessed someone else's rights being ignored?